I'm lying in my sleeping area at the moment, which is the floor, because I'm still doing my sleeping on the floor experiment for 30 days. And it's quite hot at the moment. Now, I wanted to do a quick video on my experiences today because my sleep experiment's going really well, by the way. I'm still feeling really good. But I wanted to talk about something I did today, which is I went to the andrology unit, also known as a sperm bank, and last time I went was just over 5 years ago when I was just about to go on a ketogenic diet to manage my cancer and epilepsy. I was on a low-carb diet at the time to transition, and it will be interesting for me to compare my semen sample from back then to about 5 years on 5 years later, having been on a therapeutic ketogenic diet for cancer management. It will be interesting to see the motility and the sperm count. And yeah, it'd just be interesting for me to see if there are any changes to that. I looked at a very interesting study quite recently, well, today, looking at fish oil in particular, because my whole thing with my ketogenic diet is to have a therapeutic ratio of omega-3 and omega-6. Try to have a 1-to-1 ratio, as close as possible to 1-to-1 at least. So I do have a lot of oily fish in my diet, and previously I was also taking a krill oil supplement, and then experimented with cod liver oil as well, and then I switched to an algae-derived high DHA formula because I was questioning the quality of fish oils in general. It's very difficult to trust. But I did that. I continually tested my fatty acid profile in my blood, not just for the omega-3 to 6 ratio, but in general, because I feel like that's very important, and it's something that's a snapshot in time, so it's good to keep testing. Eventually I switched to just having oily fish, and I realized, and sweetbreads, which I think have a decent ratio of omega-3 and 6, and also just having eggs from hens that eat their natural diet of insects and grubs and just foraging around for food. I think that gives them a nicer fatty acid profile. And yeah, I've been looking at studies of oily fish, or fish oil, the components of fish oil more specifically, and how it affects the sperm of different animals. There are some human studies, but not many, looking at the actual sperm fatty acid profiles as a result of ingestion of different fatty acids, not just fish oil, but mainly looking at fish oil, and it appears to alter the composition of the seminal fluid favorably, and also the tails of the sperms, the spermatozoa, appear to be, I think, largely made of the DHA, the docosahexaenoic acid, which is long-chain omega-3 fatty acid that you get primarily from oily fish. And vegans will say that you can convert plant omega-3 to DHA and EPA, the longer chain omega-3 fatty acids. However, this is very inefficient. It can be boosted by turmeric, and you can get plant DHA from algae, which is what I supplemented with previously. So it may be possible. But it's often stated that with DHA, if you were to supplement with DHA, you should have vitamin E, which is often why these supplements contain vitamin E. But there's also quite possibly other constituents of nutrients within those foods that contain the DHA that would allow it to be more used properly in the body, more useful. So I would argue that it's better to have the whole food, which naturally has the vitamin E in it, as well as other fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, which can support that process of allowing it to get to our brains and cerebrospinal fluid and the seminal fluid, so a lot of the fluid within our body. It was interesting just to see how not only fish oil but different fatty acid profiles in the diet can influence the motility and the count, the sperm count. So how good a swimmer it is, and also how many swimmers we have to get to where we want it to go. There's only one that can make it, obviously, but into the egg. But it's good to have lots of strong, healthy swimmers, and that's a sign of overall health. And yeah, it's interesting to think about how that seminal fluid might indicate how healthy our whole central nervous system is, because that cerebrospinal fluid that goes all the way, it surrounds the brain and the spinal cord, and there's also just the water in the mitochondrial matrix. That's very important. So these omega-3 fatty acids are very important for the integrity of cells. And for me, I noticed that if I have more oily fish in my diet, I find I can actually eat more protein, which is interesting, and manage my epilepsy better. I also just seem to feel better. And yeah, it has many benefits. The brain is just largely made up of DHA. About 50% of the fatty acids in the brain are composed of DHA. It's essential for our eyes as well, and vision, brain structure and integrity. In respect to our eyes are an extension of the brain. Healthy eyes indicate a healthy brain. And in brain cancer, I've expressed this before, but in brain cancer you see this lipid dysregulation whereby you have a high amount of arachidonic acid, which is inflammatory. You can think of the role of prostaglandins and clotting. The clotting action is pro-inflammatory, which isn't always a bad thing, but if you have too much omega-6, that can be a problem. So what I was going to say is, with brain cancer, with advancing grade, you have more of a dysregulation in favor of omega-6 fatty acids than you do omega-3. And then with lower in grade, that dysregulation becomes more, if you see it like a seesaw, it becomes more level. So if you have like a more solid benign tumor, it's not as dysregulated, and you have more integrity of the cell membranes of these tumors. So they're less diffuse and more solid. But it's still important to have those omega-3s in the diet, of course, and even more important if you have a highly malignant brain tumor. It makes sense. So yeah, long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, very important. And there are two, as I mentioned. I briefly said there's EPA, which is a precursor. So it goes on to form from that fatty acid, it goes on to make prostaglandins, and that's involved with cell-to-cell communication. And if you add more EPA to the diet, it will alter the inflammatory response quite favorably. So increased EPA can dampen the inflammatory response, which is important because with cancer of all types, you have inflammation as a major hallmark. If you go back and look at the hallmarks of cancer, that's very important. But with the brain, what you want is, say if you're taking a omega-3 supplement, you would want very high levels of DHA, and the EPA isn't as important, but it's still important. So you don't need so much of it, but what you want to concentrate on is high DHA, because the brain and central nervous system requires a lot of DHA to function optimally. And in my mother's generation, they used to take cod liver oil, and in Norway, they still see it as a very important thing to have. I think they also have things like fermented fish, which is very good for a number of reasons. So, yeah, going back to this animal sperm study that I saw, which I was very interested in. It was looking at ram sperm, and the fatty acid profile of the sperm during the feeding period. And what they saw is unique effects from dietary omega-3 fatty acid supplementation, which it altered the fatty acid profile of the semen, and the actual tails of the sperm appeared to become longer and be strong swimmers. And this effect lasted a long time after the supplementation was removed, which if that could be compared to humans, would be very interesting. Surprisingly, there weren't many studies looking at humans for that. I would have thought there were more. But it would be interesting to ask more questions about my seminal fluid, and we could see if that correlates with, or theoretically could correlate with my what's going on in the cerebrospinal fluid, and how that might relate to deuterium as well. Deuterium in the cerebrospinal fluid, and that could explain just what we see with advancing grade with different tumors. That would be interesting. Because when you have brain surgery, the fluid is really important. Sometimes they do a spinal tap. Why don't they analyze that water, you know? That would be an interesting consideration. They have the eye knife, which can analyze smoke that comes off tumors to see what type of tumor it is. And I have a special scan, which is MR spectroscopy, which is looking at the peaks and troughs to dictate what kind of tumors in the brain, which is something I think everyone should have, everyone with a tumor. And that's just a special type of MRI scan. Looks at the bioenergetics of the tumor. Very important. And another thing that I do, which may or may not alter the seminal fluid, the fatty acid profile, is that I have every day, usually in the evening, when my seizure threshold starts to take a dip, because I have very sensitive epilepsy. It's called reflex epilepsy. When I get tired, my seizure threshold takes a bit of a dip. What I do every day is I have caprylic acid. Caprylic acid is my favorite medium chain triglyceride, because what I've noticed over the years is that it does indeed do what it says, which is to rapidly go to the liver and produce higher blood ketones. I've noticed that just from testing every 15 minutes for an hour after I've consumed up to usually about 20 grams a day in the evening about the same time. I notice it does have that rapid uptake in blood ketones over and above what exogenous ketones will give me over time. So exogenous ketones will give me that rise. However, with the caprylic acid, that rise is sustained over a longer period of time. I used to combine the two, the exogenous ketones plus either caprylic acid or MCT oil. But over a while, over a couple of years, I noticed that the exogenous ketones were no longer beneficial for me. They weren't working anymore. and it appeared to actually over time decrease my seizure threshold. So I stopped having it, and I'd often wondered if the effect that I was feeling previously from the exogenous ketones was actually the salts that they come kind of in, because that's how they have to be produced. You have to have a salt, either potassium or like calcium or magnesium or whatever they're in. Sodium, potassium. Yeah. So I wondered if those were helping me with my seizure control, and what was actually the BHB, the beta hydroxybutyrate, or what was the just what it was. So I tested a number of things, a number of different fats, to see what my blood ketones were doing, what my blood glucose was doing, and how my seizure diary, how that was expressed in that way. And I noticed that for me, the very best thing to do, which was most consistent and gave me my best results, not only neurologically but also expressing itself in that numerical form with my blood glucose testing on my glucometer, was that the caprylic acid was far and above anything else, and I didn't have any negative effects from it, just purely positive. And it gave me a great energy boost. It was quite rapid. It gave me quite instantaneous relief from my invisible disabilities that I have, and that was sustained over a longer period of time. So I would say over the past almost a year, I'd say, maybe a bit longer, about a year, I've only had caprylic acid, and it's been the best thing that I have done. Now, I know there are other brain tumor patients who take exogenous ketones, and the ketones themselves do appear to have effects on gene expression in vitro. When you look at just the epigenetic changes, and I think the RNA expression, which is what happens with the RNA. The epigenetic alterations from ketone esters appear to have those effects. And then there are a few studies, very few, just on rodents and exogenous ketones. But few on humans, and the exogenous ketones you get are a different form to the ketone esters, I think. Different isoform. So the chemical structure is similar but slightly different. So we don't properly know what effect that might be having, I'd guess. And to me, just organically, it appears to make sense that if you produce your own ketones, it could have better effects than having exogenous ketones, which you're not producing. You're just taking them in. And I noticed through how I feel, I think it's important not to discount that, not to discount how you feel. How you feel can say a lot about what might or might not be beneficial, especially with my very sensitive epilepsy. And I feel much better with caprylic acid. Those are my thoughts. And I'm going to sleep now on the floor. And I've got a busy day tomorrow. I'm going to this cannabis event in Brighton tomorrow. And I'm interested in medicinal cannabis and hearing from people who've tried it. I'm going purely as someone who wants to know more and hear about actual patients and see how it benefits them, or even how it maybe doesn't for some, and to find out why, and to hear lots of stories from lots of people about medicinal use. I'm not interested in the recreational side at all, really. So just finding out about that. In regards to my deuterium body test, I should be having results of that fairly soon, within about a week, I guess. And then I'll start my deuterium depleted water test. And soon I'll get my results of my sperm sample as well. So that'll be fun. That'll be interesting to see how the seminal fluid and the spermatozoa are affected by 5 years on a ketogenic diet for cancer management. Therapeutic ketogenic diet, therapeutic energy restricted ketogenic diet for cancer management. How that affects the seminal fluid and potentially the cerebrospinal fluid surrounding the brain and throughout the central nervous system. Seeing how that might affect gene expression, eicosanoids, which are signaling metabolites, I guess you could say. I guess that's the right term. To affect prostaglandins, in this case favorably, so it dampens that inflammation. But you still have some inflammatory response, otherwise your immune system wouldn't function properly. But it's about balance and having the right balance. And those are my thoughts. I'm not going to blabber on too much now. I need to sleep. It's late now. Just wanted to get that out of my mind. I'm also challenging my brain at the moment. Going over my German with this magazine. It's a magazine in German, but it's designed to... There's no English in it, but it's designed to improve your German through reading interesting articles in German. And the reason I'm doing that is because my dad lives in Germany and I was born in Switzerland, so I need to improve my German. And it challenges my brain. It's just something else to think about. I'm doing a lot of programming as well in preparation for my work placement in 10 days time. And I'm focusing on my sleep, so it's 20 past 11 now, so I should get to sleep, sleeping on the floor. And I'm off to Brighton tomorrow morning. Hopefully it's sunny, I'll get out in the sun, do some swimming in the sea, and yeah. Have a good day, whatever time you're watching this, and stay healthy.